In the summer of 2016, the Illinois state legislature passed a resolution. Unanimous. Both chambers. Not a single dissenting vote. The resolution named an ancient fish, a creature that had been swimming in North American rivers since the age of dinosaurs, as the state's best weapon against the most destructive aquatic invasion in American history. The press had been running the story for months. Ancient monster meets modern invader, an apex predator returning from extinction to hunt the fish, destroying everything. It was the perfect narrative. Cinematic, inevitable, it wrote itself. While that resolution was being drafted, a man named Dan Stephenson was standing in front of a microphone. Stephenson was the chief of fisheries at the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, the man whose team had spent years raising this ancient fish from fry at the Jake Wolfe Memorial Hatchery in Mason County. He had personally overseen every release. He knew these animals better than anyone in the state. And what he said contradicted everything the legislature had just voted on. There was never a thought in our minds at all about any kind of control on Asian carp. On the record. In plain language, the program had nothing to do with carp. It never had. Nobody listened. Because here is the thing about a story this good once it takes hold. The facts stop mattering. The narrative had already won. And, buried underneath it, in the official language of agency reports and government fact sheets, sat a sentence that nobody had ever actually tested, printed and reprinted and repeated for over a decade until it stopped being a hypothesis and became a fact. 6 words. Asian carp have no natural predators. That sentence was the foundation of the entire billion-dollar strategy. And along the Lagrange reach of the Illinois River, a small team from Western Illinois University was sorting through trays of half-digested river mush with a pair of fine forceps and was about to prove it wrong. The real predator was not the one on the poster. It was not ancient. It was not a monster. It had been in the river the whole time, doing work that nobody had funded, nobody had aimed a strategy at, and nobody had confirmed it was happening because nobody had looked. But to understand why what that team found in those fish stomachs matters so much, you first have to understand how completely these fish had taken over, and why that 6-word sentence was never questioned. I'm Graham Whitmore. This is the story of one of the most consequential false narratives in modern conservation history. How America built its entire billion-dollar carp defense around a claim nobody had verified. How the ancient monster the country was counting on was never going to make a dent. And the scientists who built the program said so, loudly, repeatedly, and were completely ignored. And what was actually happening in the shallows, nobody was watching. A discovery so unglamorous, it never made the front page. But what it revealed has one of the most unsettling endings of any environmental story I have ever told. If you have been on the Illinois River in the last 20 years, you already know what this looks like. You throttle up, the engine noise hits the water, and suddenly the air is full of silver. Silver carp launching themselves 3, 4, 6 feet into the air, slamming into windshields, cracking ribs, leaving slime on everything. People film it and laugh because there is nothing else to do. By the early 2010 seconds, James Garvey's team at Southern Illinois University Carbondale had run sonar surveys across the river and found invasive carp making up more than 60% of the total fish weight in some stretches. 60%. In some reaches, the density was the equivalent of 2,800 carp packed into a single mile of river. The Illinois River was no longer a river with carp in it. It was a carp factory with a little room left over for everything else. The mechanism of destruction is not what most people picture. The silver carp does not attack other fish. It swims through the water column with its mouth open, filtering out the plankton at the very base of the food chain. Every native fish depends on that food source from the moment it hatches. The carp do not need to kill a single bass or catfish. They just need to get to the table first, eat faster, eat more, and everything above them starts to starve. The ecosystem collapses from the bottom up. In the 1960s and 70s, fish farmers across the American South imported these carp from Asia to eat algae and clean ponds. Then, the rivers flooded, the ponds spilled, and the carp found their way into the Mississippi Basin, 31 states of connected water. They swam north, hit Illinois River, and exploded. The question that haunted everyone: why here? In their native rivers in China, these fish are just fish. Common. Controlled. The answer people settled on became gospel. Over here, the carp had no natural predators, so they bred without limit and turned the river into a monoculture of leaping silver. Say it enough times, and it stops being a hypothesis. It becomes a fact. But nobody had checked, because by the time anyone thought to check, there was a far more dramatic story demanding attention. And it had a monster in it. The Illinois River connects through a man-made canal to Lake Michigan, and from there to all 5 Great Lakes, a fishery worth $7 billion a year, drinking water for 40 million people. If the carp establish in the Great Lakes, they do to that system exactly what they did to the Illinois River. The front line of this fight was never about saving the Illinois River. The Illinois River was already lost. It was about stopping the carp from taking one more step north. So the government threw everything at it. An electric barrier in the Chicago Canal. The Brandon Road Interbasin Project, a $1.15 billion system of layered defenses near Joliet. Commercial fishermen paid a 10-cent per pound bounty to haul carp out by the ton. In the winter of 2023, a single 10-day operation in the Starved Rock Pool hauled out 750,000 pounds of silver carp, confirmed by Brian Schonung of the Illinois Department of Natural Resources as the largest single freshwater harvest in United States history. Over 13 years, that effort produced a 95% reduction in carp density near Chicago. The number is real and remarkable. But the moment you stop, you lose everything you won. The carp return within a single spawning season, pushed downstream into the belly of the invasion, and they are still everywhere, breeding freely. Schonung said the quiet part out loud. Eradication is off the table. They are in management mode. Learning to live with them. A treadmill, one that only works if someone keeps paying for it. Forever. That was the mood in which this story starts. Resignation, a river you cannot fix, held back by a wall you can never stop reinforcing. And into that mood, from out of the mist of the Illinois River, emerged the ancient monster. Deep in the bottom of the Illinois River lives a fish most Americans have never heard of. The alligator gar. Up to 8 feet in length, over 300 pounds. A flat snout holding 2 rows of interlocking teeth, a body armored in scales so dense an ordinary knife cannot cut. Its lineage stretches back more than 100 million years. For most of that time, it sat at the top of the food chain across the southern and midwestern United States. Then humans wiped it out of the north. They called it a trash fish, shot it for sport, and built levees that cut off its spawning habitat. The last confirmed wild alligator gar in Illinois was caught in 1966 in the Cache River Basin, about 7 feet long, 130 pounds. By 1994, the state declared the species extinct. Gone from Illinois waters, Illinois joined a federal reintroduction program in 2010, and Dan Stephenson's team began releasing juvenile gar raised at the Jake Wolf Memorial Hatchery. From 2010 to 2013, roughly 6,000 young gar were stocked. Only about 1,500 survived long enough to establish in the wild. A tiny number. But a native species, declared extinct, quietly returned to the rivers it had once ruled. And then someone told the press about the math. The largest native predator in North American river history had just been released into the very system the most dangerous invasive fish in modern American history was occupying. The story swept across America within weeks. The Illinois Senate voted unanimously to urge the IDNR to accelerate the program. That resolution formally stated the alligator gar was the only native species capable of eating adult invasive carp. Dan Stephenson, the man who built the program, called that statement publicly misleading. He had been saying it since the beginning, on the record, in press releases, at conferences. Our stockings have never had anything to do with invasive carp. There was never a thought in our minds at all about any kind of control on Asian carp. Then he explained why with a clarity that leaves no room for interpretation. Put 1,500 gar spread across hundreds of miles of river next to a carp population measured in tons per river mile. The math does not need a calculator. And even that wasn't the whole problem. A silver carp outgrows the gar's reach within its first few months of life. After that, it swims away untouched forever. The ancient apex predator the entire country was counting on could only feed on carp during a window lasting weeks after hatching, while each female silver carp laid up to 1 million eggs per spawning season. The scientists said this over and over, in reports, at conferences, in the press. Nobody wanted to hear it. A boring answer never beats a good monster story. And so the alligator gar stayed the hero long after the biology had made the case against it. The monster on the poster was a dead end. But the carp really were declining in some stretches. If it was not the alligator gar, and it was not, then what was happening? The answer was already in the backwaters. It had been there the whole time. And in the summer of 2014, someone was finally about to find it in the most unglamorous way imaginable. That summer, the carp in the Lagrange Reach had a monster spawning year. Conditions aligned and they bred in enormous numbers, flooding the backwaters with millions of juvenile silver carp. Finger length, soft, transparent along the belly, the water was thick with them. To most people, a disaster. More carp. To a small team led by James Lamer at the Department of Biological Sciences at Western Illinois University, working with the U.S. Geological Survey, the Illinois Natural History Survey, and the Upper Midwest Environmental Sciences Center, it was an experiment they could never have set up on purpose. Because for once, the river was full of carp at the one size where they were not armored, not gigantic, not untouchable, at the one size where they might just be food. So the team did the unglamorous thing. They went out with electrofishing gear and fyke nets and caught the ordinary residents of the river bass, crappie, gar, catfish, drum. And then they cut them open, one after another, and looked inside 1,472 fish. August through November 2014. Not a lucky photo. 4 months of methodical work. Here is the problem with reading a fish stomach. A baby carp, half digested, turns to mush. You cannot look at the slurry and say that was a silver carp. What remains is biological soup. So the researchers used a trick. Silver carp have hard structures in their throats, pharyngeal teeth and chewing pads that survive digestion long after the rest of the body is gone. Species specific. A fingerprint. Find them in a predator's stomach and you prove a carp was eaten. Measure them and you can back calculate how big that carp was when it died. Picture the actual work. A tray, fine forceps, half-digested river. Somebody bent over a microscope for hours, picking out structures smaller than a grain of rice, asking the same question of each one. Is this a carp? The least glamorous detective work imaginable. Just forceps and a question nobody had thought to ask. And it was about to overturn something printed on government documents for a decade. They started finding the fingerprints, and they kept finding them. Baby silver carp bones in the stomachs of largemouth bass, white bass, black crappie, white crappie, channel catfish, flathead catfish, smallmouth bass, yellow perch, freshwater drum, yellow bass, and short-nosed gar. 11 native species. In each one, juvenile carp showed up in more than 15% of stomachs. The fish everyone said had no predators were being eaten by the entire neighborhood. Now, a skeptic pushes back, and they should. Baby carp were overwhelmingly abundant that summer. Maybe predators were just eating what was everywhere. Lamer's team thought of that. They measured how available baby carp actually were relative to everything else that small in the system. The answer? 9% of available small fish prey. If predators were eating at random, carp should have shown up at roughly that rate. A minor footnote, they did not show up as a footnote. When the team ran electivity analysis, measuring which prey a fish actively chooses when it has options, 3 species stood out. White bass, black crappie, and short-nosed gar were not just tolerating baby carp. They were selecting them over native minnows. And they kept choosing carp even as carp numbers thinned through the season and became harder to find. That is not an accident of abundance. That is a predator that has decided this prey is worth pursuing. Peer-reviewed. Published through Western Illinois University, the USGS, the Illinois Natural History Survey, and the Upper Midwest Environmental Sciences Center. Follow-up work in 2015 confirmed it largemouth bass, showing silver carp in 18% of diet samples, with size-selective predation confirmed up to the physical limit of what their mouths could handle. Michael Spear, quantitative ecologist at the Illinois Natural History Survey, on the cumulative harvest data. We're making an increasingly large dent in the population. That incentive seems to be paying off. Now, I need to be honest, because this story can be made to sound more triumphant than it is, and doing that would misrepresent the science. Native predation is not clearing the Illinois River. Not close. The vulnerable window Lamer's team found only opens during big spawn years. The moment a silver carp grows past what a native mouth can handle, which happens fast, it is untouchable forever. Decades of breeding, up to 1 million eggs per female per season. No bass or crappie can touch it. The 95% reduction near Chicago is still the humans, still the nets and barriers, and the 750,000-pound hauls in winter. The base did not save the Illinois River. Do not let anyone tell you that. But here is what the base did do, and this matters more than it sounds. They shattered the excuse. For over a decade, Asian carp have no natural predators was not just a description. It was a strategy. Every dollar, every net, every barrier aimed exclusively at the adults, the visible problem, the ones leaping into boats and cracking ribs. Nobody thought about the juveniles because the official story said nothing in the river could eat them anyway. What Lamer's team found changes that. If native predators are actively working the juvenile bottleneck for free, without funding, without a press release, in every backwater, then protecting that native predator community is not a soft idea. It is a lever. A river with healthy base, crappie, and gar quietly taxes each new generation of carp before they grow into the untouchable adults. The whole expensive war was aimed at the wrong end of the life cycle, and a natural system was already working the right end. Nobody confirmed it because nobody looked inside the fish. That changes now, but the story does not end there, because while Lamer's team sorted through stomachs in the Lagrange Reach, a completely separate question was being quietly answered 40 miles upstream. And the answer is the strangest thing in this entire story. For more than 10 years, scientists tracking the carp migration had noticed something they could not explain. The invasion front had stalled. Silver carp pushing north, and then, near the town of Kankakee, about 47 miles from Lake Michigan, they stopped. Not because of the electric barrier, not because of the netting. A species that had swept across the entire Mississippi basin and crossed every natural barrier it encountered was sitting still at one particular stretch of river as if something invisible was pushing it back. No visible wall. Nobody had built one there. For years, nobody could explain it. In October 2024, Professor Corey Susky and his team at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign published their answer in scientific reports. They collected water from north of Kankakee, where the carp had stalled for a decade, and placed juvenile silver carp into it. The fish slowed almost immediately, reduced movement, stopped exploring, and while moving less, their bodies were burning more energy, the signature of an organism fighting something hostile in its environment. Not poison, not a trap, just water. Chicago's own water flowing downstream. Decades of industrial and residential discharge had loaded that stretch with volatile organic compounds, pharmaceuticals, and wastewater indicators that the fish's nervous system registers as hostile. A 2017 USGS water quality report had mapped exactly where these compounds spiked. Right around Kankakee, the chemistry shifted sharply, and right at that same point, the carp had stalled for over a decade. When animals experience a stressor, Susky said, sometimes they reduce activity and hunker down. They think, I'm just going to ride this out and see if conditions improve. When we put the carp in the Chicago water, that's what they did. They reduced activity and stopped moving. Concrete riverbanks replacing natural, shallow spawning flats. Locks and dams fragmenting the channel. 3 separate obstacles, chemical, structural, and hydrological, stacked on top of each other, forming a defensive wall nobody ever designed. The $1.15 billion Brandon Road barrier is still under construction, projected for completion in 2030 at the earliest. As of July 2026, construction has been stopped again by a federal administrative review, the second halt in less than a year. The wall that is supposed to permanently close the door to the Great Lakes does not yet exist. But the wall Chicago accidentally built with its own pollution has been working for over a decade, for free. 2 individual carp have slipped past the electric barrier in all that time. A big head carp found in Lake Calumet in 2010, 6 miles from Lake Michigan. A silver carp caught in a commercial gill net in 2017, 9 miles from the lake. Each time, search teams turned over every corner of water. No breeding population, no second fish. Just a lone stray swimming alone toward a lake it never reached. 2 fish. Over 15 years. The accidental wall holds. And now the part that should stay with you. Chicago is actively working to clean the Illinois River. Reducing discharge, improving water quality. This is the right thing to do. Environmentally correct. What ecologists have demanded for decades. It's good that the Chicago area water quality is getting better, Susky said. But the reality is that improving water quality might inadvertently remove the deterrent repelling invasive carp. If Chicago cleans the river, it may open the door it accidentally closed. The virtuous action and the catastrophic outcome are the same action. And sitting between that accidental chemical wall and Lake Michigan right now, with the engineered barrier stopped again, are 40 million people's drinking water, a $7 billion fishery, and a treadmill of nets that stops the moment the funding does. Think back to that sentence. 6 words, printed on government fact sheets, repeated until it stopped being a hypothesis and calcified into received wisdom. Asian carp have no natural predators. That sentence was why nobody funded a boat to go electrofish the Lagrange Reach and cut open 1,000 predators and look inside. The official story said there was nothing to find. And while it stood unchallenged, a natural crew was already at work. In every shallow backwater in the unglamorous water, no sonar survey was mapping, working the one stage of the carp's life where it was soft and reachable. The stage every untouchable adult had once passed through on its way to becoming untouchable. What Lamer's team found in those 1,472 stomachs, those tiny, white pharyngeal teeth, smaller than a grain of rice, sitting in a tray of half-digested river, told the truth about the sentence. The carp were never unkillable. The river had 11 answers swimming in every backwater. We just never checked their stomachs. So we built the entire defense around the adults we could see. While the problem we could have influenced was always in the shallows, we weren't watching. Step back and look at the whole shape of it. A fish imported to clean algae from ponds becomes the most dominant river species in American history. A government spends over $1 billion on a strategy built on a sentence nobody tested, endorses an ancient monster that the scientists who built its program publicly called useless, on the record, in plain language, for years, while the ordinary bass and crappie and gar do quietly in the shallows what no policy ever asked of them. A university team spends 4 months sorting fish mush with forceps and demolishes the foundation of the official narrative. And the only thing standing between 40 million people's drinking water and that invasion right now is Chicago's own pollution and a treadmill of nets that stops the moment the money does. The Alligator Gar is back in the Illinois River right now, slowly returning to a system it was, removed from 60 years ago. Not because it will save the river from the carp, it won't, and the people who put it there never said it would, but because a native species that humans drove to extinction deserves to come home on its own terms. That story stands on its own. It does not need to be inflated into something it cannot be, and the bass and the crappie and the short-nosed gar that never left the ones nobody celebrated, nobody funded, nobody wrote a legislative resolution about, they are still in every backwater of that river right now. Working the bottleneck, eating the babies, doing the unglamorous work the official strategy never thought to ask of them. They found the fingerprints, they checked the stomachs, and the sentence was wrong. If this changed how you think about this invasion, or what it actually means to defend the Great Lakes, I want to know. Leave it in the comments. And tell me this, because I genuinely the right answer. If cleaning the Illinois River might remove the last accidental barrier keeping the carp out for 15 years, should Chicago clean it anyway? The river needs it. The ecology demands it. And it might open the door. That is not a simple question. And I want to know your opinion. And subscribe. Because the stories where the official answer turns out to be built on a sentence nobody tested, those are the ones that matter most. The natural world is full of them. And I've got plenty more to tell you. I'm Graham Whitmore, and I will see you in the next video.